Hi and welcome to HYPIA Research 13th meeting. Today we'll be discussing polyglot gatherings in general, and in particular 3 polyglot gatherings: the Polyglot Conference, the Polyglot Gathering, and Langfest. We're particularly interested in getting to know your personal experiences or else all indirect experiences at these meetings, and then to what extent you feel that the goal of inclusivity was met. So we'll start with whomever wants to share their opinion. I will appreciate it if you could please preface your opinion with your personal experience in these gatherings, and nothing else to add. Timothy has raised his hand.
Yes, Carlos. One can look at inclusivity from many different viewpoints. Could you tell me how you're defining it?
Yes, I think we ought to understand inclusivity for the purpose of this specific meeting as the ability to give voice to as many people as possible across geographies, gender, races, etc.
Okay, then may I make a very quick comment to start? Yes, I have the feeling that many well, I haven't been to Langfest. I have been to the Polyglot Conference and Polyglot Gathering, and there seems to be a very strong, shall we say, Western stroke European influence in them. I mean, there are languages which are non-European which are mentioned, but I have the feeling that in the polyglot well, shall we say, community, or in general, there seems to be a much bigger focus on the European languages rather than Asian languages, and also in particular, I think African languages seem to be very underrepresented.
Yes, I would agree with that. Thank you, Tim. I think that money plays a key role here. Polyglot Conference and Langfest and the Polyglot Gathering require that people travel to the specific location, and that sometimes that's not something that a lot of people can afford. And surely in the so-called global north, it is easier to afford that than in other places. And I think we also need to distinguish here between European versus non-European languages as a vehicle, meaning are most presentations in European languages or not, as a topic, are most presentations about European languages or not, and as the place of origin of participants. Do people come mostly from European countries or not? Tim wants to say something else?
Yes, just a follow-up on what you mentioned about the financial aspect. Are you simply only referring to in-person events in your discussion, or are you also taking into account online events? And what would also interest me is, in the online events, is there more diversity than in the in-person events?
Sure, thank you, Tim. I would imagine that there is more diversity indeed in the online events, because you are removing money from the equation to a great extent, not entirely, because you still need to pay for the ticket, but surely airfare and accommodation play a key role. But I mean inclusivity both for online and offline purposes, but since, or to the extent to which most of these gatherings have been taking place in person, with the exception of the last 2, surely the offline component plays a much bigger role than the online one. But yeah, you can also refer your comments to the online component. Matthias wants to participate.
Well, 2 or 3 important things. First of all, about of course, that the difference between online events and offline events, it's the economy. Most of us had to save a lot of money in order to travel, especially me. However, the physical event has no comparison with the online event, as long as, I mean, as we have to live that experience to share not only languages, but also experiences, vivencias, I mean, in that sense, I think that it's completely unpayable. At the last Polyglot gathering in Poland, there were 380 people from 62 countries. More or less 2/3 of them, maybe 3/4 of them, spoke at least 6 languages, and from those 2/3 of those 2/3, roughly half of them, even though qualify as a future fellow HYPIA member. In fact, I got even more than 50 contacts, and 3 or 4 of them also become fellow HYPIA members.
Yes,
So,
Matthias, but those languages were mostly European.
Let me argumentate. At the Polyglot gathering, there were a highly rate of people who is a polyglot. I mean, even qualifies as a hyper polyglot. But maybe one of the cons, the pros and cons, one of the cons that a Polyglot gathering has, it's not as I mean, when we talk about the quality of the lectures and the work, I mean the workshops and presentations, it's the Polyglot gathering doesn't have enough quality as deep as Polyglot conference has. By the way, at Polyglot conference, there are less people who speaks 5 or 6 languages or more. There are a lot of language beginners or people fluent in only 2 or 3 languages, but there are more quality in terms of presentations and lectures. I mean, I think that at the Polyglot conference, it's more like presenters and attendees, and the Polyglot gathering is more like to live one-on-one experience. I mean, I think that over the years, even since they are split from the Polyglot gathering, from the Polyglot conference organization in 2014, I think that little by little they began to establish their own niche or their own identity as an event. So us as polyglots, we can choose which can feel comfortable. However, those communities overlap very well, and they get acquaintance very well. That's just that.
Thank you, Matthias. These differences are relevant, but still, we need to stay on topic and specify how does this relate to inclusivity, and in particular to the overrepresentation of European topics, languages, and or participants, or lack thereof. Anja wants to add something to this.
Yes, actually, I was just in Polyglot gatherings, so into in-person and to online. So I can just talk about this from this perspective. I don't know Expo Lingua, no, the other event that you mentioned, but I was also present at Expo Lingua. I don't know if I can say a few words about this event as well. So in my experience, like Polyglot gatherings in person are more about you talk, you meet with people, you mingle, you know a lot. You learn a lot from just talking in person with people. So for me personally, there is no comparison between online and in-person Polyglot gathering, because Polyglot gathering in person is so much more than just going there, listen to some presentations, and maybe memorize something that you heard. But on the other hand, yes, as I think a few of you already mentioned, Polyglot gathering online are available to more people. Doesn't matter where on earth they are or what languages they speak, what culture is their native culture, or so on. So from other perspective, Polyglot gatherings online are more inclusive. There are like more people in those events. But I remember I had like a marathon of those presentations when it was online. When it was in person, I didn't go to so many presentations. I prefer to spend real, I don't know, those classes when you could practice the languages and just mingle. So this is an amazing experience. But yes, it's quite expensive, and just for those who live in Europe, it's more valuable. For those outside, could be a little bit too expensive maybe. just from my point of view.
Yeah, the two things here to take into account. Thank you, Anja. One is that, as Anja said, at least in the Polyglot conference, the presentations run in parallel to the possibility of exchanging languages outside of the room where those presentations are taking place. And the other one is that the Polyglot Gathering has always been in Europe. I think it began in one country. I want to say that is Germany, right? In
Yes,
Berlin.
it was.
And nowadays it's based in Poland, but it was never done outside of Europe. Whereas the Polyglot Conference has at least the vocation of being universal, and it has organized events in New York, in Fukuoka. This year is in Mexico.
In Polyglot Conference has an annual rotatory basis.
Right. Yeah. Even with that rotatory basis in mind, historically, most of the conferences of the Polyglot Conference brand have been held in Europe. But especially in recent years, they have moved across continents more. Who else wants to share their piece, Chris?
Yeah, so I have never been to one of these events because they usually happen when I'm not available, so I can't go. Usually I engage with them by watching anything that's uploaded to YouTube afterwards. So some kind of observations that I've made is that they seem quite Eurocentric. So quite often about European languages. It quite often happens in Europe as well. And a lot of the presentations seem to happen in English, which I think is quite interesting because, I mean, it is quite often the way with things that are online, but I just think the fact that very often presentations that are not necessarily about English take place in English is quite pertinent. And then a question that I had was, Matthias was saying that one of them, I can't remember which way around it was, but Polyglot Conference or Polyglot Gathering has better quality presentations. But I thought maybe to kind of link that to the topic, perhaps when we say that the quality of the presentation is not as good, it might mean that the event is more inclusive because maybe the requirements to present are not as strict. Just a thought I had.
That's the point.
Yes.
They have quality, but in Polyglot Gathering they are much more informal, as not necessarily academic. People that not necessarily related to the academic work can be presentation in Polyglot Gathering much easier.
Yeah, in one of the articles, and I'm getting to you, Tim, in a second, and thanks, Chris. In one of the articles I read, it was actually an interview with Richard Simcott, the founder and organizer of the Polyglot Conference. He said that for him, it was very important to have the academic perspective represented in the Polyglot Conference, and that in contradistinction to this, the Polyglot Gathering was created specifically to be more informal, or the more informal version of the Polyglot Conference, hence the disparity. Tim, go ahead.
Well, actually, Carlos, thanks for saying most of what I wanted to say. But I just wanted to come back to what Matthias and Chris were also talking about as regards quality. Now, from my limited experience of the Polyglot Gathering and Polyglot Conference, I share your view that if you are defining quality as being, shall we say, from an academic point of view, then I would be tempted to agree with Matthias's claim that the quality is higher. But if you look at quality from the point of view of being sort of useful, or relatable to language learners, which some participants, which I personally also find more useful often, I think you could argue that the Polyglot Gathering has a better quality than the Polyglot Conference, although it is less, academic.
Interesting take on what we mean by quality, right, when we approach these conferences. Sadly, I've never had the chance of attending the Polyglot Gathering, at least not the in-person version. I attended the Polyglot Conference in Ljubljana. Then this year I'm attending the one in Mexico, and the Polyglot Gathering, I attended the online version in 2020, but I don't really have that point of contrast of attending the Polyglot Gathering in person. Tim.
Yes. We've been talking about the differences between the Polyglot Gathering and the Polyglot Conference and how both have developed their own character, and this is partially reflected in the style of the talks. But it's just an open question to everybody. is there something that isn't done at either of these conferences that you would like to be seen, that you would like to see more? So if one was to organize a third type of conference, what should, would that be about, in your opinion? I don't know if I'm making sense, but
Yeah,
I'm just trying to sort of turn the conversation around to say, what is the sort of Polyglot conference that we would like to have?
That's a really good question, Tim. This is something that Richard also discusses a lot. He says, well, I've received criticism from this and this perspective. People have rightly, perhaps, pointed out the shortcomings of the Polyglot conference, but I rarely do I find people who come up with their own programmatic, positive, part construence sort of ideas for what could be an improvement to the Polyglot conference or even an alternative to it. I think that before giving the word to Anja, I think that one point that has been brought up already is that we should see presentations in more languages. If I'm not mistaken, the last Polyglot Conference Global in 2021 featured, I think, between 7 and 10 different languages, meaning presentations in between 7 and 10 different languages, which surely in a Polyglot Global Conference could be more. Anja?
Maybe if it's a kind of alternative gathering in person, then I would put more talks into or I would exclude talks probably, maybe, and put more games, more language tandems, more language, I don't know, some kind of exercises when you can actually speak with people, practice with people, because when you ask in the end from 2000, this year's gathering in Poland, what they like the most, they said park. So you see, it was not gathering, it was not a presentation, it was that mingling, that talking, that gathering itself. So maybe more, it would be another alternative to those gatherings, conferences. There could be more just meetings, just chilling, just talking about their own personal life or their own life perspectives. Like I had experience when you talked with certain people in their native language, they spoke more about personal stuff, about what's happening in their countries and stuff like that, which usually if it's very official, they don't, or they are afraid to talk about it. So maybe from this point of view, if it's something more on the human level, like when it's about connecting in different languages and so speaking in the person's native language so that he opens more and you start talking about topics that, I don't know, could even be taboo.
Okay, thank you, Anja. Just
Topics
throwing
in
a little
the
bit up
normal
on that.
circumstances. So this is from my experience, this is my opinion. Yes, this is all what I wanted to say.
Okay, thank you, Anja. Your connection was unstable at some point, so I thought you had finished, but you hadn't. I think now you have. So yeah, drawing up on a little bit up on that quote from Mandela, or at least attributed to Mandela, that when you speak to a person in a language they understand, that goes to their mind, in their first language that goes to their heart. So diversity of genres in terms of activities. We're talking about different languages in the presentations, but maybe the point is not to rely solely or even mostly on presentations and to open it up to more social activities, including games and others. Okay, who else wants to build on this or else contribute with their take on the question? Victor, welcome to this meeting. Tim wants to participate.
Hello.
Hello.
Okay, yes. I mean, just one suggestion. I agree with Anya's idea that a conference does not necessarily have to focus on presentations, but we were talking about how we have, firstly, a lot in English. Well, I think because there's nothing wrong with having sort of polyglot events where you would concentrate on a particular linguistic family, as in my impression is, correct me if I'm wrong, that somebody, for instance, who learns one Romance language or one Slavic language often has quite a good idea or ability to understand others as well. So personally, I would be very much in favor of having events, maybe shorter events, where you focus on a language other than English or on a particular linguistic family. such as Slavic languages or Germanic languages. The other thing I would mention is that language is sort of is rarely exists on its own. So language is usually, for most people, combined with some other activity. So I realize there are people who are specialized in languages, but many people, like myself, use of language in another sort of context, for instance, in the context of research or whatever. So I think more events, but maybe more niche events, focusing on polyglottism connected with a certain area. Shall it be business, or shall it be science, or diplomacy, or whatever? I think that's something that I haven't seen a lot of myself. Just my 2 cents.
Mm-hmm. I think that we saw that connection in some recent conferences that you yourself organized, right? As in languages other than English in science, for instance.
Yes, I mean, the problem with such a conference is that, again, a lot of what happens take place in English when it's being presented. Yeah. And that, of course, is the strength of English as a lingua franca. It's that you can transmit information impersonally to as many people as possible, so more people using English. But of course, the discussions that happen outside the presentations, they are often not in English. Mm-hmm. And so I suppose that's the this comes back to the point that Anya made. Maybe we don't have to have so many presentations where one person is trying to transmit information to as many people as possible, but rather focus on more sort of social events, particularly in smaller groups, because that, I think, will also encourage a greater variety of languages during the event.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Tim. Victor wanted to say something.
I just wanted to call attention to another issue about language, which I would say it's also Latin America and Brazil, which is the fact that native Indian languages are highly underrepresented.
You mean indigenous languages?
Like Tupi,
yeah.
Guarani, Latin Indians, so of course all other natives like Indonesia. I think of Latin because today it is a big problem of Brazil in public health, because many Indian groups are restricted to highly geographical places, and contact with the rest of the world is difficult. Of course, they don't have internet, mainly they don't have internet, and also there's important economical and also cultural issues about that. And this is an important issue to multilingualism.
Thank you, Victor. And in defense of the Polyglot Conference, I have to say that there is a whole week about Nahuatl, to learn basic Nahuatl, leading to the Polyglot Conference this year in Mexico. So for those who attend in person and can stay up to 1 week before the actual event, there is a related Nahuatl course, and there are courses about other indigenous languages and languages other than English. For instance, myself, I'm teaching Ladino in Ladino for a workshop. But then again, these are different, these are categories, these are separate. One thing is workshops about a rare language, and another thing is presentations using that rare language as a vehicle. We're talking that we're lacking in the latter rather than the former. So yeah, Mexico is a great place to emphasize indigenous languages. And Victor wants to add something?
Yes, I think we lack through participation of those people. This is something important. The same way we lack, I lack cultural knowledge about Slavic languages and Slavic cultures, because we have an ideological domination of Europe, of America, United States of America, English. And meanwhile, other languages are badly understood. The people are badly understood. The cultures are badly understood. And this is some continental languages, like Slavic languages and other, and also the Indian, the very localized, the rare languages.
Thank you, Victor. And then when we talk about more participation, we need to also perhaps specify at what level, right? Because we have decision-making participation, as in who is the organizer, who collaborates with that organizer. We have participant participation, pardon the redundancy, as in who are the speakers. Then attendance participation, right? As in who are paying the fees to attend in person or to a lesser extent online. And then topic participation, right? What are the topics discussed and how prominently do indigenous languages and people feature there? Who else wants to add something? Matthias? Matthias, you're muted.
Well, as I commented before, the public, the attendance, as well as the lecturers in either Polyglot Conference, Polyglot Gathering, and even though up to a certain extent also in Langfest, overlaps. The variety of presentations not necessarily means that I mean the variety of the presentations not necessarily cover all the problems, all of the actual problems of the society that needs to be to be covered. For example, about for example the protection of indigenous languages, as Victor told, the protection of minority language and its use in the education sphere and in the media sphere, or in the science, or in the at professional level. All the aspects regarding the research oriented to the protection of the language spreading and protection. Well, I think that despite being a different proportion between Polyglot Gathering and Polyglot Conference, I think that there's no such a significant difference to appreciate who is better or not. It's just that about which approach it's about which approach they have. In terms of virtual events, I mean the virtual event it's not necessarily as massive as physical events, even though I was at the Polyglot Conference Global 2020 and 2021, and they have even less attendees rather than the Polyglot Gathering in Poland. I mean, we have to focus that not necessarily the amount of languages spoken for the attendance. No, it's not a significant difference. Okay, Anya, I'll let you talk. Sorry.
I know. Just I moderate the debate, Matthias. We limit, as I said before in other meetings, interventions to 5 minutes, but you've only spoken for 3, so you still have 2 more minutes if you so wish. Which you don't?
Yes,
Okay, then,
Matthias,
Annie.
you want to
Continue.
finish?
Mhm.
Okay. So I wanted to open also a question of advertising, or maybe it's just me, but since I began to be interested in those events, I found a lot of events and meetings and gatherings and coffees, language coffees and language tandems in different countries, doesn't matter where I went. But at the beginning, like for example, Carlos, you mentioned you were in Ljubljana in Polyglot conference. I was in Ljubljana, I was studying there, but I had no idea there's a Polyglot conference there. Also next year in Polyglot Gathering in Bratislava, I accidentally found out an event on Facebook because I was studying there as an Erasmus student. And I said, I will try it, but like, who is actually getting the information, or how is this information shared? I think this could be also a good question, because only those who know about it, but there are like so many people who are interested, but they don't even know that those things exist. So maybe how to share it, how to let people know that those events exist, and how can they join? Thank you. I would like to hear your opinions as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Anja. I know that there have been increasing efforts to spread the word, and that Richard Simcoe, for instance, has made a conscious effort to reach out on as many platforms as possible: Clubhouse, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, you name it. And so I think it's easier to access it now, but I think that your reflection brings a question, which is the digital gap. Who can access this information? And even when they can access it, who can enjoy the digital experience in the case of hybrid or online versions of these conferences? Because I remember that talking from a personal perspective, I had connection difficulties accessing the private language chat rooms in many different languages across many different days, both in the Polyglot Gathering and the Polyglot Conference.
Within Telegram or within
No,
platform?
within the platform set up by the Polyglot Gathering and the Polyglot Conference, independent of Telegram.
Yeah, regardless.
Me too.
And I think that the media, the Telegram channels, both at the Polyglot Conference and Polyglot Gathering, they are a key factor to keep keep the Polyglot community going on, even though in between events.
Yeah.
However, when we talk about the physical events, it's not as diverse in the terms of I wonder why do the lectors still using English as in lingua franca when they even though as much as the present, even though there are languages with even 90 or 95% of the attendees can share in common. For example, among us, all of us, we can speak in Spanish, even though Timothy has an A level. All of those except Anya can speak French. All of those except me, or well, all of those, all of those except Usman can speak German, for example. And we have a lot of more languages in common that we can speak up to 95% regardless English. So, but they cannot use at the lectures.
Yeah.
Not,
I think a middle of the road solution is to use more than one language to carry out the presentations. For instance, this year in Mexico, I'm presenting in French, but my slides are going to be in English. So even if somebody does not understand what I'm saying in French, they can always have the English translation there. So that way you can bring a more variety of languages with intelligibility not being compromised. Again, one could argue that French is an imperial language, which it is, etc., etc. Matthias, Tim has raised his hand. Maybe
yes,
Tim, maybe Tim and then Matthias. Yeah.
Okay, just a very quick question. I mean, we've talked about sort of giving presentations in language as other than English. Are you aware of any sort of study that has been done or which shows that people are more inspired or more likely to learn a language if a talk, is given in that language and not in English. Because I could imagine that people, if they see somebody using another language, that they may well be more inclined to do it themselves rather than the person hear about the person talking about learning another language in English. And that's what I find. There are lots of good YouTube channels out there about language learning, but personally, I think they all tend to be in English, which is understandable. But I think I would find them personally more inspiring if they were actually talking about learning a language, whichever language it was, in that language, and maybe with subtitles in English if they want to reach a wider audience.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. Before going to Matthias, yes, to your point, I remember being in Los Angeles, California for a Judeo Spanish conference. All presentations were in English except for one. That presentation was actually in Ladino, and that inspired me very much, both emotionally and in terms of stealing ideas and picking up brains, to deliver a presentation the very next year in that same conference in Ladino, which I did. So certainly it has a contagion effect. And yes, subtitles are also another option, but subtitles, from my personal experience using them at the Hyperpolyglot Activist, whenever I have conducted interviews in Spanish, are very time consuming. So that's the downside of it. Somebody else wants to, after Matthias. So Matthias and then the next one.
Maybe we have to distinguish to give a lecture about a language rather than, in addition, to give the lecture in the same vehicular language. Maybe not everybody who attend a specific lecture can understand that language. But if you talk about that language and maybe with some with several parts of your lecture in that language as a vehicular language, maybe it can turn on in the sense of to raise awareness. But the organizations of Polyglot Conference and Polyglot Gathering, I would like to ask for Judith Meyer, Richard Simcott, and anybody who, Peter Balash, or anybody who is in their respective organizations, to organize much more lectures about languages in their own in the same language as a vehicular language, because it will raise awareness about our diversity, not only to speak them in the practice outside the lectures, but in the lectures themselves.
Yeah. Two things before going to Anja. One thing is I suggested the use of translingual lectures, meaning going from one language to the other, using more than one language as part of your linguistic repertoire. Not exactly code switching, right? It's different from translingualism, but people can check my presentation in that at some point. And yes, teaching that language in the language is also a major thing. But as I said, that's common in workshops, not so much in presentations. Now, Anja.
Yes, actually, I also wanted to open these topics, how it should be the presentation presented so that people will actually join, because I saw from examples that if they were not in English, people didn't join. I even remember from my own perspective, it was presented in Sorbian, not Serbian, the Slavic language spoken in Germany.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know the right pronunciation in English. It's Sorbian, right? So that language, I was afraid, like, I can't understand it. But then afterwards, I was interested in this language, and I searched for the presentation online. And my native language is Slovenian, just for those who don't know. But just understanding Slovenian, I was already able to understand the Serbian present, and he was not even a native speaker. Usually, from my experience, when I for now speak just 2 Slavic languages, and I learned a 3rd one. But from this perspective of Slavic languages, I'm able to communicate with all people who speak Slavic languages as long as they are native speakers. If they are not, sometimes accents and mispronunciation can make you it's harder to understand. But if there are native speakers, I can understand. Doesn't matter which Slavic language they speak, just because I speak one or now maybe two Slavic languages. So this is what I wanted to open. How it should be presented, this new language, so that people will join and hear the language and realize that they can understand it. Thank you.
Thank you, Anja. One point I wanted to make related to what Anja was saying before we go to Victor is that there is such thing as linguistic accommodation, right? So when I make presentations in Ladino, which comes from a Romance language, I consciously prevent myself from using words that come from Hebrew and Turkish so that people can understand better, people whose first language is Spanish. But then again, that creates the impression that this language is closer to Spanish than it is. So people can accommodate with a prior disclaimer, I think, or combine the non-accommodation with the giving of handouts where the vocabulary that is unlikely to be understood is explained or translated. And now I wanted to ask Victor what back voicing is. I'm not familiar with that.
Excuse me, when someone is talking, the translators talk simultaneously in other languages. It's an old translating technique, not very used, but it's interesting sometimes. You see it sometimes in documentaries when someone is the documentary is written in English, for instance, and you have an interview with German speaking person, and the German speaks, and then somebody simultaneously talks in English.
It's like dubbing.
Yeah.
So
Not dubbing, but not dubbing because both audios are heard.
Okay.
You hear the people speaking. Yes, you hear. It's like I'm hearing you speaking in English, and somebody speaking in Portuguese.
Right.
So to add to Anya's ideas, an interesting possibility would be to choose some key languages and make conferences in those, because, for instance, I am a cinephile and I love to go to Netflix and hear, I don't know, Luxembourgish movie with German subtitles. I don't know Luxembourgish, but really reading and hearing aids my understanding of Luxembourgish. So it's for me it's a big stimuli to learn that other language.
I also love that practice on Netflix. By the way, there is a language reactor on Netflix which you can add on Chrome, I believe, that helps you learn languages while chunking content on Netflix, also on YouTube, selected content, not just every content there. And who else? We are entering the clutch territory, which is the last 5 minutes. So if you've saved the best for the last, now might be your chance to unleash that knowledge.
Maybe, Carlos, you could conclude everything that we say, or maybe someone pops with another idea. I'm sorry for just joining like this without hands.
Oof, too much to ask for me to summarize all the wonderful contributions we had. But we did make a point about diversity of presentations and diversity of content first, meaning that these gatherings should feature presentations, but also other activities, particularly activities that allow us to interact in a more informal setting, and one where we can tap into people's first language, which would in turn translate into more private/intimate experiences and contents being conveyed. We also talked about within presentations themselves, what kind of techniques we could use to make it more diverse in terms of languages. So we talked about back voicing, we talked about using one vehicular language and another one on the slides, using the same vehicular language to talk about a rare language. So if we're talking about Chabacano, then we make that very presentation in Chabacano. We haven't talked so much in terms of diversity at the decision-making level. We've talked more about diversity in the presentations, the presenters, the attendance. We've made the point that the Polyglot conference is more formal than the Polyglot gathering, but that doesn't translate necessarily into better quality, but rather different. It's a different type of gathering. It's a different sport. We toyed with the idea of specifying how an alternative polyglot meeting would look like, but we stopped kind of halfway through. So we are unlikely to come up with a new polyglot meeting out of this meeting. What else? Am I missing something? No.
Every one of the existing big main events of the Polyglot community, and when I'm talking about big main events, I'm not talking about Polyglot Gathering, Polyglot Conference, and Langfest, but also the language event and Women in Language, among others. I think that the whole thing is complementing each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that every language event as a product themselves, as a product itself, has its own its own unique features that makes me distinguishable and positionable regarding others. The point is that which one of those polyglot events is better or not, it depends on grounds of personal taste. However, I think that every one of those events is as important as it is as far as the polyglot community is cohesioned, as far as the academic community in language can choose whenever you feel that it fits better to their needs. It's not as linear as it seems. It's the only thing I can say.
Okay, thank you, Matthias. And just before going to Anja, we did speculate about creating a hyper polyglot gathering / meeting / conference, which was going to be held in Islamabad, Pakistan, if I'm not mistaken. Shout outs to Usman. But then the pandemic happened. But there is an argument that we're talking about the polyglot gatherings and meetings lacking enough diversity in terms of language. At the same time, we have a hyper polyglot as opposed to just polyglot organization. So when we combine both, we might create a different creature altogether.
I take advantage to discuss an idea with Usman Wagas Johan and with you about to create a HYPIA Congress where, despite being open for HYPIA non-members, the requirement to be a lecturer is to be a fellow HYPIA member or a HYPIA scholar. Mm-hmm. However, to put in practice this kind of HYPIA Congress, it would be difficult as HYPIA itself is a zero budget organization because it requires money to travel abroad and all about the logistics associated with that.
That's very important. We need sponsors to sponsorize this. Richard joined the HYPIA community. And now back to Anja for the last 30 seconds.
Yes, I just wanted to conclude that maybe the topic that we didn't mention so much, that gatherings are those who make people from different nationalities, different religions, different, I don't know, beliefs and language skills meet together and share their knowledge and, I don't know, enjoy just being into each other's company. And maybe among you went to meet someone special, but then you meet just random person who made your day, who made the travel worth it. So maybe this could be the conclusion that it doesn't matter if you saw what you meant, if you visited what you do, if you were present in those events, but it's worth it because there will be people who will stay for you with you forever, at least in your memories, if you lose contact. So maybe this is all from my point, from my perspective. And I apologize for the problems with the connection. I'm in Germany, and in dormitory we don't have the greatest connection. So thank you.
Thank you, Anja. In the words of John Lennon, life is what happens when you make other plans. So maybe you go to Polyglot Gathering with some intention, then you met some other person and your life changes forever, etc. Thank you so much for your participation. It was a pleasure. Hope to see you again in the next HYPIA Research meeting. And thank you so much.
Shukriya.
Ciao, ciao. Ciao, ciao.